At this very moment, in a remote corner of the scorched Sahara Desert, a tiny ant no larger than a pencil eraser is sprinting frantically across the blazing sand, a lethal terrain capable of claiming its life in a mere 90 seconds. To find its way back home, the creature relies on a complex mathematical equation processing continuously within its very legs. Simultaneously, within the dense, shadowed canopies of the Borneo rainforest, another astonishing spectacle unfolds. Approximately 200,000 ants are locking themselves together, creating a living suspension bridge out of their own bodies. Elsewhere, a lone worker deliberately detonates herself like a chemical grenade, sacrificing her life to defend a colony that will never even register her name. With a global population reaching a staggering 20 quadrillion individuals, the world of ants functions without a single leader, a central command center, or a preconceived master plan. Every action is dictated entirely by chemistry. It is this pure, unadulterated chemical orchestration that has forged an ancient civilization, making human history appear incredibly brief by comparison. Yet, this very same rigid system routinely drives them into fatal traps, and the ants themselves possess no mechanism to recognize the danger. This is the true, unvarnished reality of how an ant empire operates. Every grand phenomenon, from the very first beat of a nuptial wing to the final, tragic death spiral, unfolds under these merciless, unyielding laws. Picture yourself standing in an open field just after a violent rainstorm has passed. Pools of rainwater still cling to the blades of grass. Suddenly, from every direction imaginable, the earth beneath you begins to churn violently. Miniature, fragile wings catch the glint of the breaking sunlight. Thousands, then tens of thousands of winged insects launch themselves simultaneously into the open air, darkening the sky like a thick column of smoke rising from a smoldering fire. This is the nuptial flight, the grand event that marks the birth of every ant kingdom on Earth. Mature colonies wait patiently for a perfect alignment of environmental triggers, a sharp drop in barometric pressure, atmospheric humidity surging past 80%, and soil temperatures reaching an ideal threshold. At that exact moment, they release their entire investment, virgin queens and male drones, all equipped with wings. The sky becomes a chaotic vortex of swarming life, reaching altitudes as high as 300 meters above the ground. A single colony can launch thousands of queens into the air at once. In less than an hour, the males complete their sole biological duty of mating and immediately perish. That is their entire existence, a single flight, a single purpose, and then sudden death. However, the fate of the newly fertilized queens is scarcely more forgiving. Ravenous predators descend upon the swarms, tearing the airborne ants apart. Rival colonies lie in wait to slaughter any individuals that wander too close, and sudden fluctuations in weather wipe out countless others. For every 1,000 queens that confidently launch into the sky, perhaps only one fortunate individual survives to touch the earth alive again. The very first act of this resilient survivor is to bite off her own wings, painfully wrenching them from her body one by one. She will never take to the sky again, never look upon the open horizon, and she does not look back with regret. This is nature's most expensive lottery, and the house always wins. Yet, landing safely is merely the first grueling step, for the queen must now endure a trial far more terrifying than any predator. Absolute, prolonged isolation deep underground, with nothing to sustain her but her own flesh. You are now 3 centimeters beneath the surface of the earth. Here, there is no light, nor is there a single sound. A microscopic chamber, no larger than a glass marble, has been sealed securely from the inside. A solitary queen sits in the pitch black, completely devoid of food. This is the claustral phase of colony founding, one of the most solitary and brutal periods in the entire biological world. Having entombed herself within this chamber, the queen has no way to forage for food. She has no workers to tend to her, and no external store of provisions. Consequently, she must perform an act that sounds like science fiction. She begins to digest her own flight muscles, the massive thoracic structures that once powered her wings through the sky. She reclaims this stored energy, dissolving the muscle fibers from within to transform protein into eggs, saliva, and the vital biological fluids needed to nourish her first generation of workers. If this initial brood fails, if the larvae wither, if the underground temperature shifts violently, or if a fungal pathogen takes hold, the queen will starve to death inside a tomb of her own making. Yet, here lies a phenomenon that breaks standard biological rules. Ant queens do not age the way other creatures do. They do not slow down, nor do they experience a decline in fertility. On the contrary, their egg-laying capacity actually accelerates over the years, maintaining peak reproductive efficiency until their final breath. There is no gradual decline, no warning signs of decay, only a lifetime of maximum acceleration followed by an abrupt, permanent stop. Nevertheless, even the most productive queen cannot build an empire alone. She requires workers, soldiers, and specialized laborers. Remarkably, the mechanism that determines whether a microscopic larva develops into a humble worker or a magnificent queen has absolutely nothing to do with genetics. Consider two larvae resting side by side in the same incubation chamber. They share the exact same mother, possess identical genetic blueprints, and grow up in the same microclimate. Yet, one will transform into a massive, winged queen destined to live for decades, while its sibling becomes a tiny, sterile worker whose life will end in a matter of months. The sole divergence in their destinies comes down to a single factor: diet. This process is known as nutritional epigenetics, a caste system written entirely through food. As nurse workers tend to the larvae, the precise volume and protein concentration of the food they deliver dictates everything. An abundant, high-protein diet triggers a specific chemical pathway known as the juvenile hormone. This acts as a developmental switch, unlocking the genetic sequence required to produce a queen or a massive soldier. Conversely, a restricted, low-protein diet forces the larva down a lesser developmental path, permanently locking its body into the form of a diminutive worker. A mature queen can weigh up to 8 times more than a worker from her own colony. This vast physical disparity is governed not by DNA, but by the menu. The colony does not sort its citizens based on natural talent or inherent merit. It manufactures them directly according to its economic needs. Roughly 95% of the colony's population exists because they were intentionally starved during their larval stage, their growth stunted, their reproductive organs suppressed, and their bodies forced into a lifetime of hard labor. The queen, who once dissolved her own muscles to feed her first brood, now watches passively as her subsequent eggs are strictly rationed by the workers to become either future royalty or disposable laborers. She has no say in the matter. The workers make the selection for her. However, such a rigid caste system would be utterly meaningless without flawless coordination. Millions of specialized workers require task assignments. They must know where to forage, what structures to build, and when to halt. Yet, there is no manager overseeing the tunnels, nor a central brain directing traffic. How, then, are these commands transmitted so flawlessly? As you navigate the subterranean labyrinth of a nest, every surface is coated in a dense, invisible film of chemicals. You cannot perceive these pheromone trails with the naked eye, but they overlap and stack so thickly that they dictate every single movement a worker makes throughout the day. This pheromone network serves as the core operating system of the entire colony. Ants possess between 300 and 500 distinct odor receptor genes. By comparison, a fruit fly possesses fewer than 100. This is not a minor evolutionary advantage. It is a profound technological leap, comparable to the difference between a crude walkie-talkie and a high-speed fiber optic network. Each pheromone molecule carries critical data: the exact location of a food source, the specific identity of a colony, the threat level of an intruder, or the reproductive health of the queen. The ant receiving the chemical signal wastes no time contemplating the message. Its body reacts mechanically and automatically. This system is so deeply hardwired into their biology that if a core coreceptor gene named Orco is damaged during development, the ant's brain triggers an immediate, built-in safety purge, apoptosis. The olfactory neurons deliberately destroy themselves. The affected ant loses its sense of smell entirely. In a society constructed purely on scent, this defect renders the ant incapable of functioning, communicating, or surviving. It wanders through its own home like an invisible ghost. The colony does not run on loyalty. it runs on pure chemistry. If you cannot speak the chemical language, you do not exist. This miraculous chemical network does more than just coordinate individual behavior. It reshapes the metabolism of the entire colony in ways that mirror much larger industrial-scale systems. Observe two worker ants performing the exact same task, carrying a beetle carcass twice their body weight over an identical distance. One belongs to a modest nest of just 100 individuals, while the other hails from a megacity housing 1 million residents. They belong to the same species, possess the same anatomy, and perform the same work. Yet, the ant from the smaller colony expends a significantly higher amount of energy to complete the task. Its metabolic rate burns hotter and faster, causing its body to wear out rapidly, leading to an earlier death. This strange biological phenomenon is known as Kleiber's law. In the wider animal kingdom, larger organisms consume less energy per gram of tissue than smaller ones. This law governs everything from a tiny field mouse to a massive blue whale. Ant colonies adhere strictly to this law, but at the level of the collective superorganism. As the population of a colony scales upward, the metabolic rate of each individual ant drops significantly. This does not occur because the ant becomes lazy or works less, but because the infrastructure surrounding it becomes vastly more efficient. High population densities eliminate redundant movements. Food is transferred from hand to hand more rapidly, and chemical signals travel shorter distances. The colony optimizes itself precisely like a modern human city. As the population grows, the per capita infrastructure requirement decreases. The individual ant possesses no physiological independence whatsoever. Its metabolism is regulated and throttled by the density and chemical atmosphere of the crowd around it. It is not an independent organism. It is merely a cell functioning within a giant, living body. And like any human metropolis, an ant colony desperately requires infrastructure, ventilation, and climate control to keep millions of residents alive underground without a single piece of mechanical equipment. Imagine being 6 meters beneath the surface. Millions of ants are constantly exhaling carbon dioxide. Vast fungal gardens are generating heat, and decomposing waste is releasing toxic gases. By all laws of conventional physics, the oxygen supply should have depleted hours ago. Yet, it remains perfectly fresh. Something deep within the earth is continuously circulating air through the dense soil. Leafcutter ants have constructed passive ventilation systems so sophisticated they rival the greatest engineering achievements of mankind. Their nests are designed with raised mounds on the surface and strategic air vents arranged to exploit surface winds. As wind sweeps across the top of these mounds, it creates a powerful pressure differential, the Bernoulli principle. This suction draws stagnant CO2, heavy air up from the depths and expels it, while simultaneously pulling fresh, oxygen-rich air down through peripheral tunnels. No fans are required, nor any motors. It is pure physics sculpted by sharp mandibles. The results are astonishing. The soil surrounding a massive leafcutter colony actually contains lower levels of carbon dioxide than the open forest floor right beside it. The colony acts as a massive carbon dioxide chimney for the landscape. When autumn arrives, the colony proactively seals up to 90% of these surface vents to conserve heat and protect their precious fungal gardens, which require a constant temperature of 25 to 30 degrees Celsius and near total humidity. Ants do not merely build shelters. They operate highly regulated, climate-controlled agricultural facilities. However, not all ant species choose to excavate deep subterranean strongholds. Some are forced to live in environments where the very ground is a lethal trap, and their survival depends on a mechanism far more bizarre than architecture. Picture yourself in the middle of the unforgiving Sahara Desert. The surface temperature has soared to 70 degrees Celsius. The sand is hot enough to cook an organism in minutes. Yet, sprinting across this inferno at a staggering velocity, which scales to an incredible 52 kilometers per hour in human proportions, is a tiny ant the size of an eraser. This is the Saharan silver ant, and it navigates using pure mathematics. In this extreme heat, traditional pheromone trails evaporate instantly. There are no landmarks to follow, no visible pathways. Consequently, the silver ant runs an internal algorithm, a biological navigation system built from 2 data inputs. a solar compass that reads polarized light patterns in the sky, and a step integrator, an actual internal odometer within its limbs that counts the length and frequency of its strides to measure distance. As the ant zigzags erratically across the scorching sand searching for heat-killed insects, its brain continuously calculates a homing vector. The moment it is ready to return, it does not retrace its steps or wander blindly. It turns on a dime and bolts in a perfectly straight line, heading directly for a nest entrance smaller than a single grain of rice. Researchers demonstrated this by attaching tiny stilts made of pig bristles to the legs of these ants. The stilted ants consistently overshot their nests on every trial because the algorithm in their brains was still calculating distance based on their shorter, natural strides. If a sudden gust of wind lifts a silver ant and drops it a few meters off course, the vector in its brain suffers a fatal data corruption. The ant becomes permanently lost. It will die on the burning sand within an hour, its legs still driving in a calculated, perfect straight line toward a home that is no longer there. The mathematics is flawless, but it possesses no capacity for forgiveness or error correction. In the tropical rainforests of Central America, another species solves a completely different survival puzzle, relying not on mathematics, but on the literal geometry of their own bodies. You are observing a massive river of army ants surging across the damp forest floor, 200,000 bodies moving in unison like a single fluid. Suddenly, they encounter a gap, a wide tear between two leaves, or a deep chasm in the tree bark. The column does not halt, nor do they waste time searching for a detour. The lead ants immediately construct a bridge out of their own bodies. Army ants operate on a simple, decentralized algorithm with a single behavioral rule. If you feel the weight of another ant on your back, freeze. Lock your mandibles and grip the surface with your claws. As the vanguard reaches the edge of the chasm and slows down, the trailing traffic flows directly over them. Each ant that senses the pressure of a boot on its spine halts and becomes a structural component of the bridge. The bridge lengthens, beginning as a cantilevered structure jutting out into space, gradually forming a complete span until the entire army marches across safely. No single ant knows how wide the gap is, nor did any engineer draft the blueprint. The structure forms organically from millions of blind bodies adhering to a single tactile rule. As the traffic thins and the pressure eases, the bridge dismantles itself automatically. The structural ants unlock their joints and rejoin the march as if the bridge had never existed. If the gap is too wide and the cantilever fails, the living bridge collapses under its own weight. The structural ants plummet into the abyss, yet the army behind them continues to press forward. The colony spends no time mourning its infrastructure. It immediately rebuilds the span using the very next bodies in line. For a moment, the system appears remarkably flawless. Pheromones coordinate millions of individuals, mathematics guides them across lethal deserts, and living architecture conquers every chasm. No single body could survive alone, yet every mechanism fits together perfectly, like gears in a massive clockwork engine assembled by an invisible hand. Yet, a fatal flaw always lingers within this perfect system. A systemic error can lead to mass casualties. Because when your entire civilization operates on a single principle, follow the individual directly in front of you. A single wrong turn does not just claim a single life. It drags thousands of others to their doom. Look down at the rainforest floor. A perfect circle of ants is forming. Hundreds, then thousands of ants are marching in a flawless, unbroken loop. Round and round they go, with no destination, no exit, just pure motion. This is the ant mill, the death spiral. Army ants are blind. They navigate entirely by tracking the pheromone trail of the ant immediately preceding them. If a small detachment becomes separated from the main column and the leaders accidentally loop back, crossing their own tail trail, the circle snaps shut. Every ant that follows is locked into that endless loop. The pheromone signal becomes intensely reinforced, fresh, and indistinguishable from a legitimate marching route. The largest ant mill ever recorded in history measured a staggering 370 meters in circumference. It took a single ant 2.5 hours just to complete a single circuit. They marched continuously like this for days. There is no override mechanism to break the loop. No ant dares to step out of line, and none question the validity of the path. The very system that successfully coordinates 20 quadrillion insects across every continent, builds magnificent living bridges, cultivates crops, and wages large-scale wars is utterly incapable of self-correction. The ants march in a perfect circle until they collapse and die from sheer exhaustion. This is not a disease, nor a malfunction of the system. It is the algorithm running precisely as it was designed to. Yet when the algorithm works, when the world of chemistry, living bodies, and mathematics align, ants do more than just survive. They build extraordinary civilizations. Return to the subterranean world once more. This chamber looks nothing like an ordinary tunnel. It resembles a state-of-the-art greenhouse. Vast, snowy sheets of fungi stretch across a substrate of chewed leaves, flourishing in the absolute darkness. Tiny nurse workers patrol the rows diligently, plucking away contaminating spores, adding fresh substrate, and harvesting nutrient-rich pods. This is agriculture in its purest form, invented by ants 50 million years before humans planted their first seed. Leafcutter ants do not actually consume leaves. They have never eaten a leaf in their lives. They slice foliage, transport it deep underground, masticate it into a paste, and use that paste to cultivate a single species of domesticated fungus, an organism so profoundly altered by millions of years of artificial selection that it can no longer exist in the wild. The fungus breaks down the plant matter to produce complex sugars and essential amino acids, the true food source of the colony. The ants tend the crops, weed out invaders, quarantine diseased sections, and transport contaminated waste to dedicated underground landfills. And that is merely farming. Other species operate massive livestock ranches. The black garden ant herds aphids exactly like human ranchers manage dairy cattle. They protect the aphids from predators, stroke their abdomens to stimulate the secretion of honeydew, and selectively breed individuals that produce sweeter, more complex sugars. The constant presence of the ants even exerts a chemical pressure on the aphids, forcing them to alter their internal biology to produce higher quality yields, even at the expense of the aphid's own physical health. And if the aphids stop producing, the ants butcher them without hesitation. 50 million years of farming without a single famine, no government subsidies, and no debates over agricultural policy, just pure efficiency and yield. Maintaining an industrial civilization underground with millions of bodies packed shoulder to shoulder in the dark requires one final core system. A system rarely discussed, but one that keeps the entire machine clean, even if the price is paid in the colony's very soul. You are in the brood chamber. A worker is meticulously grooming a pupa, scraping away external debris and coating it in a specialized antimicrobial fluid secreted from a gland unique to ants, the metapleural gland, a biological antibiotic factory built directly into their thorax. Workers groom one another constantly, trapping toxic fungal spores in specialized mouth pouches, treating them with antibiotic secretions, and expelling them once fully sterilized. But when this healthcare system fails, when a lethal pathogen breaches the defenses, the colony does not waste time attempting to cure the sick. It executes them immediately. Infected pupae emit a specific chemical distress signal, and the workers respond by tearing open the cocoon, dragging the helpless larvae out, and spraying it directly with formic acid. The pathogen dies with the patient. There is no second diagnosis, no right of appeal. As for the dead, they are strictly handled by undertaker ants, specialists who locate corpses and carry them to designated refuse piles located far away from the living quarters. Yet, a grim reality persists. Ants have no concept of death. They cannot recognize a corpse by sight or behavior. They must wait for oleic acid, a chemical that takes 2 days to accumulate within a decomposing body. Until that chemical appears, the corpse is entirely invisible to the colony. If you spray oleic acid onto a perfectly healthy, living ant, its sisters will immediately restrain it, carry it to the graveyard, and dump it onto the decomposing pile despite its violent struggles. The ant will be forced to sit among the dead while perfectly alive until the scent evaporates. The chemistry does not care if you are still breathing. Imagine being inside an alien nest. The walls carry the wrong scent entirely. The queen is not your mother. Yet, the workers here do not know this. because they were born and raised within these walls. Slave-making ants have completely abandoned the tasks of foraging, nest construction, and brood care. They launch violent raids on neighboring colonies, slaughtering the adults and stealing the pupae. The stolen young hatch inside the enemy fortress, become imprinted with the alien queen's pheromones, and spend their entire lives serving the very empire that massacred their biological family. They will never know the truth. Yet, these enslaved workers do not always submit passively. Once they grow old enough to assume nursing duties in the brood chambers, a subtle rebellion begins. They slowly realize that the pupae they are tending belong to their captors. This recognition does not stem from conscious thought, but from the very chemistry that governs their lives. In a quiet, methodical rebellion, they begin to tear the slave-maker larvae to pieces. One by one, they assassinate up to 66% of the enemy's future generation. They derive absolutely no genetic benefit from this revenge. They are sterile, they will never return home, and they cannot reproduce. They kill simply to protect other colonies they will never see. Driven by a genetic imperative older than memory, this is the closest equivalent to true rebellion in the natural world, executed without a single mind capable of desiring it. You are resting on a branch 40 meters above the forest floor in Borneo. A violent territorial war is raging between two massive rival colonies. Workers lock mandibles, and bodies begin to pile up. Suddenly, a worker significantly smaller than the rest rushes into the thickest part of the combat zone. It does not bite, nor does it sting. It violently contracts its abdominal muscles and ruptures its own body. Workers of the exploding ant species possess massively enlarged glands running the full length of their bodies filled with a toxic, corrosive yellow adhesive. When a fight turns unwinnable, the worker detonates herself in a spray of toxic glue that permanently immobilizes the attacker. She does not survive. She was never meant to. Her entire anatomy was built to be a weapon she would use only once in her life. The colony will never remember her name, because she never had one. That is how an ant colony works. Not with intelligence, not with leadership, not with anything resembling a plan. Somewhere underground right now, a queen who ripped off her own wings and dissolved her own muscles is laying her 10-millionth egg. She has no idea what she has built. She cannot see the intricate tunnels, the high-tech fungal farms, the silent graveyards, or the vast armies outside. She just lays eggs. The chemical language tells her to, and she obeys. No single ant understands the colony, nor does any individual see the larger picture of the empire. Each member merely follows a thin chemical trail, responds to a tactile cue, and obeys a hormonal switch it did not choose and cannot override. And from 20 quadrillion blind, disposable, and perfectly obedient bodies, emerges agriculture, architecture, medicine, and large-scale warfare, a grand civilization that has endured, outlasting every empire humans have ever built. They do not think, they do not decide. They simply follow the chemistry. The chemistry has never been wrong, except when it is, and when it is, they march in circles until they die. Because the system does not correct, it does not adapt, and it does not care about the fate of any individual. It simply runs.